Welcome. Welcome. It's nice to see people joining. We're just going to give it a second as people are filtering into the webinar. Wonderful. It's great to see so many people joining us this evening. I'm delighted to welcome you to our virtual talk tonight, Reckoning with Masculinity. As we begin, I will start with our land acknowledgement. The Philadelphia Museum of Art recognizes Philadelphia as part of Lenape-Hoking, the ancestral homelands of the Lenape peoples. A long history of broken treaties, forced migrations, and fraudulent agreements, such as the walking purchase of 1737, displaced many Lenape from these lands. The museum and its staff, including myself, strive to understand our place within the legacy of colonization and to act as allies to Lenape people and their vibrant communities today, including the federally recognized nations, the Delaware Tribe, Delaware Nation, and Stockbridge-Munsee community. So my name is Linnea West, and I work in public programs here at the museum. I have the honor of welcoming you to this evening's conversation between James Rose and Jun P. Nakamura, titled Reckoning with Masculinity. I'm going to tell you just a little bit about our exceptional speakers this evening. James, welcome. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you.
James Rose is a printmaker and professor emeritus who taught in the art and design program at Kutztown University. He received a Master of Fine Arts degree in printmaking from Tyler School of Art here in Philadelphia, and he completed his undergraduate degree in painting and printmaking at Virginia Commonwealth University in Richmond. He also attended the Skowhegan School of Painting and Sculpture. His prints and drawings have been exhibited in numerous exhibitions nationally. James has received 2 fellowships in the visual arts from the Pennsylvania Council on the Arts, and his work is in the permanent collections of the Philadelphia Museum of Art, the African American Historical and Cultural Museum, the Philadelphia Free Library, and the Allentown Museum. We are, of course, also joined by Jun. Jun, hello.
Hello.
Thank you so much for being here. Jun P. Nakamura is the former Suzanne Andre Curatorial Fellow in Prints, Drawings, and Photographs at the PMA, where he curated the exhibition Macho Men, Hypermasculinity in Dutch and American Prints. Jun completed his PhD on Dutch 17th century printmaking at the University of Michigan in 2022. And beginning this month, he is assistant curator of prints and drawings at Princeton University Art Museum. So we are so lucky to have these 2 incredible speakers with us today, and they will be having a conversation together that asks a big question. How have ideas of masculinity, gender, and sexuality been constructed and depicted in different times and places, and how might we think about them today? Jun will present on how these ideas are addressed in the images of brawny musclemen on view in the current installation Macho Men, Hypermasculinity in Dutch and American Prints. And we'll just share a link in the chat to that in case you wanted to look up more information about that installation. And James will discuss how those same themes relate to his own art practice and how he reckons with how his body is seen in works such as Null and Void, 2 large drawings recently acquired by the museum and on view in a gallery adjacent to Macho Men. We'll also put a link in the chat to those works. So both Macho Men and James's drawings are on view through March 20th, and I hope tonight's conversation will encourage you to visit or revisit our galleries and see these works in person. In terms of a format, both of our speakers will present briefly before engaging in a conversation with each other, and we are saving time at the end for questions from all of you. So just a little bit of housekeeping. We like to use the Q&A box for questions. It has a helpful upvote feature. If you see a question you like and you want to hear it answered, give it a thumbs up. Those questions will go to the top of the queue, and those are the ones we'll answer first when we get to Q&A. As you might have noticed, the chat is also on. We encourage you to say hello and share where you're tuning in from. It's also where we will put links to further information that you can follow up. The program is closed captioned. You can turn on closed caption using the CC button in your Zoom toolbar. Finally, we are recording this program. We're going to send an email following up after the program. It'll include a link to the recording. It'll also include any links that we put in the chat, so you can look back at everything we share with you tonight. So all that said, it's truly a delight to have so many people joining us for this program. And Jun, I hand it over to you.
Thank you. And nice to see some familiar names in the chat. I will go ahead and start. So I'm Jun Nakamura. I created this show, Macho Men, Hypermasculinity and Dutch and American Prince. As Linnea mentioned, it's up until March 20th, so there's still a little over a month to go see it if you've not seen it yet. I'm going to talk about the show very briefly as a way of introduction. So in short, Macho Men is a show of images of big muscly men made in two very different contexts. That's the Netherlands or Dutch Republic around 1590 or 1600 and the United States around 1930. And the show is structured as a series of comparisons of works from both contexts, showing off some of the formal and thematic similarities between the two periods. And through these juxtapositions, one sees how artists in both periods were using images of thick, muscle-bound men in similar ways, promoting ideas of nationalism or of civic or military virtue, or conveying ideas of stability and strength, of the nation, of the common people, etc. And such images reveal what an ideal or desirable male body might have looked like for these artists and their audiences. And whether that desire is sexual or aspirational, like if its body is one wanted to have or wanted to be with, there is some amount of objectification and sexualization at work in the prints. And seeing as most of the images are of large muscular men in various states of undress, sometimes tussling or grappling with each other, the images can also look quite homoerotic, even if that wasn't necessarily how they were originally intended to be read, although some were made to be read that way, such as the watercolor by Demuth on the left here. But I did hope to invite queer readings of the Dutch works, which have rarely been examined through this kind of lens, though to me, the homoerotic tenor of an image like this is undeniable. So in this print by Jan Muller, after Cornels van Haarlem, piles of nude male bodies, or mostly male bodies, tumble over each other, grappling with each other, with faces and hands framed between men's legs, and legs spread, butts and scrota on view and presented towards the audience. And there's a lot of butts in this show, I'll say. And this reminded me of some of the work of Paul Cadmus, an American artist working in the United States in the 1930s, who was a gay artist. He's one of two, one could say, openly gay artists in the show. And so in this side-by-side, you can see how Cadmus and Jan Muller both similarly organize figures in stacks, bodies tumbling and rolling on the ground with legs splayed and butts emphasized. And I think Cadmus is a great example because it speaks to some of the complex kind of issues around masculinity and sexuality that are at play in the show. So this print reproduces the composition of a painting that Cadmus made for the WPA, which was a government-funded art initiative. And the painting was censored by the US Navy because it showed American sailors on shore leave getting drunk and carousing with women, many of whom were understood to be sex workers. But during the backlash, Cadmus was defended in the newspaper by someone who argued that these are precisely the kinds of men the military needs, macho men. The term sissies comes up in newspaper articles around a number of the works in the show, stating that that they shouldn't be sissies, that they ought to be off chasing women and, quote, doing a little drinking, dancing, and the rest of the things that he men do, arguing that that sort of thing is essential to being a sailor. But his defender probably didn't pick up on the fact that he also included references to gay meetups that happened in ports of call like Riverside Park, which is shown here in this print in Manhattan. So Cadmus's use of these hyper masculine bodies helped to hide the homoerotic subtext of his art, and this kind of traditional appearance of masculinity, of conventionally manly men, was seen as antithetical to being gay. So it's interesting how Cadmus subverts masculinity and heteronormative expectations in his works like this, and another print that is a similar subject that also includes this somewhat coded reference. But I think it's this kind of subversion of heteronormative expectations that recurs in later works by artists like Tom of Finland on the left, or with kind of the phenomenon of the Village People, whose songs Macho Man and YMCA became gay anthems. And again, utilizing this very kind of stereotypically or conventionally masculine, macho aesthetic body, etc. And I'll skip over these because I'm already, I think, over on time. But so Macho Men went up at the end of August, and since late November, it's been joined by James Rose's 2 drawings hanging in the room adjacent to the entrance. And I was really happy we were able to include these 2 drawings because Macho Men is a show that's a lot about men picturing other men's bodies and in many ways objectifying those bodies. And it doesn't leave a lot of room for agency or subjectivity in the interpretation of those bodies. So I was pleased to show James' work because, and I don't want to like reduce it to being a foil, but it deals with similar themes of masculinity, bodies, sexuality, but it's so much more about kind of interiority and how outward appearances interact with kind of interior experience. So the works can be put into conversation, but they're also separate enough to where it does function as standalone, and I'm sure James will have a lot more to say about it. So I will pass it off and give remote control.
So hello, everyone. I first wanted to say thank you to Jun and Linnea, to Louis and the folks at the Philadelphia Museum for putting this together, and having my work and having me as part of this talk. I think to start, I'm just going to sort of read a short statement about how I feel about my work in relation to the exhibition, and just talk a little bit about my thinking about the way that I use my body in my work. While I think that there are some similarities, I think it's also very different in terms of what I'm trying to sort of say. So I will start by basically showing you 2 very old images at this point. These were done in the late 80s. I was still in undergraduate school. And I decided, we decided that the work that I would show you at this point, which is a very small section of work, would be mostly about figures and full figures instead of necessarily focusing on portraits. I decided to choose these works here just to show some old work and give you a sense of a little bit of evolution of where I'm coming from. And then also just sort of, I think of these works as literally like sort of milestones or things that sort of I did, a long time ago that still sort of feed essentially what I do today. And so again, these were done in undergrad, maybe in my first or second drawing studio. I had a graduate student who was teaching drawing at that point who actually complimented me on my ability to draw. Told me I had great facility at doing that, but then posed some questions to me about the work that I hadn't really sort of thought about. So I would draw very traditionally, in my mind, traditionally in terms of just using simple charcoal or graphite on paper at that point in time, and I didn't ever think about disrupting that. And so, so she sort of planted the seed of trying to start to think about what I wanted to say, but also really sort of disrupting my comfort zone, where I was where I found comfort in making the work. I'm probably going to spend a little too much time talking about these two pieces because they have, such importance to me at this point. The first piece basically is a drawing of a woman from a fashion magazine. At this point is what I'm remembering. It's basically charcoal on paper. And I decided to disrupt this drawing by adding collage to it. And I remember going into the fine arts office and using the Xerox machine and Xeroxing lots and lots of copies of my hands. I just thought it was, they had a very beautiful look to them. And so I decided that I wanted to sort of pair those things with my drawing. And so this is one of the first pieces that I made at that time. And at that time, I think that I was excited about the juxtaposition of a print or a photographic image with my drawn image, one being really sort of almost immediate, the other taking a lot of time. I liked that sort of play. I liked how they looked visually together, that both the sort of male, the masculinity of my hands with this sort of softer feminine image, where it could almost be her hands, but not quite. And I think this piece resonates for me today because it really represents my journey as an artist. Basically, I spent 4 years in the military prior to going back to college and before making these drawings. And I used to, and these drawings, again, are done at a time when I was quite closeted. So I was not out as a gay man. And to try and shorten this a little bit, because I know that I'm sort of talking a little bit too much here, but this piece or these pieces represented a breakdown of my always trying to sort of hide who I was and sort of remain closeted. I thought that the images or Xerox copies of my hand with the pressure points felt like me trying to push out of that space. And that space was thinking about my military days and trying to continue my drawing. I think my drawing at that time was a lot of females, a lot of sort of pin-up images in which I used to place on my walls in the barracks. And so for me, it was literally a way of continuing to hide my sexuality. And so this work was important to me because it represented sort of that first inkling of sort of breaking out of that, in a sense, if that makes sense. Same thing with this drawing. It mostly represented, again, a breakaway from just drawing on paper. I found this old sheetrock that looked really interesting. It had this beautiful sort of tone to it, and decided to make this graphite drawing on it. Basically, me sort of stabbing myself in the back is basically what's happening in this image. And I think it was me literally trying to sort of break out of the space that I had, that I was living in at the time, and trying to sort of find my way to my truth, in a way, is what I'm going to say. And then we're going to skip a few years ahead. This is shortly after graduate school. I was making really large images at this point. These are, again, self-portraits. They are 5 by 6 feet. each. They are basically ink, like India waterproof ink on canvas. And so I made a lot of these. I made a series of these over time, and they just, again, sort of represented for me my trying to sort of break out of or come to terms with some of my issues in terms of trying to reconcile my sexuality, but also trying to reconcile how I was viewed or how I'm viewed in the world. Sorry, I'm sort of going a little bit fast, but these are, again, two more images sort of in that same vein. They're basically, again, ink on canvas. I decided to put these two in because they represented sort of my sort of loosening up of my drawing and just sort of letting the ink sort of do a little bit of what it wanted to do on the canvas. So the drawings look a little bit more loose and abstracted, and I liked that about them in terms of internally or conceptually what they meant to me. These, again, are more what I call drawings on canvas. A lot of people did view these as paintings, but this came at a time when I was, again, sort of dealing with issues of race, you know, thinking about Black on Black crime, thinking about my own journey as a Black man in this country, and feeling the danger of that to some degree, and just sort of making pieces that sort of speak to that. This is a series that came also a little bit later. It also came at a time when I needed to stop doing really large pieces because you know, I was living in a space where I didn't have a lot of space, so I had not much room to sort of store really large things. And so I decided to start working smaller, but doing things in succession and making multiple pieces that sort of represent a larger piece. And so this series is a little bit hard to see in the image that sort of encompasses the whole work. You can't see too many details, but this piece entitled Charmed is really, for me, about transformation. It talks about, or it speaks to me about my desire to transform, to come to terms, to sort of deal with my sexuality, deal with my experience in this world, in this space. And so, again, this series of works is about a series of 35 drawings here that they are mainly charcoal. They have a little bit of gold spray paint and gold marker. There's a little bit of red marker in them, but they're mainly charcoal drawings. And these are just a couple of details of the images. The gold images is obviously from this row. And then the triangle shaped image is here in this row of images. If you look at this work closely, and again, I recognize that it's probably going to be a little bit hard to see, but you see the transforming or the change in tone of the body as you move from left to right. And then also you're seeing a transformation of the charm, so to speak, from top to bottom. And I'll leave it at that. I decided to put this in just so that you have a sense of scale and a sense of how this piece looks installed. It's a little bit different from the original image, but one of the things that I like about doing work in smaller sections to create larger pieces is that you can reconfigure them to work in different spaces. And so for this gallery space, the piece could only be 3 drawings tall instead of 7 or 5, sorry. And so the configuration had to be a little bit different, but still worked in terms of concept. This series is again coming a little bit later. This is me sort of really sort of delving into working on Mylar. I became fascinated with that when I started, I learned how to do photolithography in graduate school, and realized that I loved drawing on Mylar, what that felt like, what it looked like. And so I did a little bit of you know, experimenting with that. These pieces are basically figure drawings. My figure literally sort of drastically cropped because I was just interested in sort of dealing with my skin in this case, and hence the title Tainted Skin. And in this moment, I think a lot of what I was dealing with was, again, just sort of racial issues that I was dealing with in terms of being profiled, and a number of other things that were going on that made me sort of want to sort of talk about or speak to the skin that I'm in at this point. You'll notice that some of this imagery is similar, some of the poses are similar, some of it is actually the same image. I am a printmaker, I do enjoy printmaking, and a lot of these works are combinations of printing and drawing at this point. I did work out sort of a process of printing on Mylar, and so that allowed me to sort of put a lot of different images together. So these images are layered, you know, sometimes 3 to 4 layers of Mylar. The title of the series is Visible Spirit. I think, again, just speaking to my frustration, my sort of dealing with, you know, my issues at the time in terms of, again, being profiled, but also dealing with my sexuality in terms of trying to come out and trying to be fully who I am and truthful to who I am. That sort of turmoil and all the sort of personal issues that I was sort of dealing with at the time just sort of found its way into the work. Again, another series of drawings, these again coming a little bit later. I think in my work at Kutztown, there were a number of times that, you know, if I spoke out about race or if I spoke out about something that I thought was unfair, you know, I would usually get told I was playing a race card or something like that. And so I decided to make my own deck of cards, basically. So hence the title, Four of a Kind. These are ink drawings on canvas paper. They're about 18 by 24 each. There is, I think, 54 of them or 52 of them. And basically, this is the whole work installed. This is just a detail, and this is an even closer detail just to sort of see a little bit of the work up close. These are a little bit later. They are part of my fascination that I had with drawing with ballpoint pen, just using something very simple to make work. This Tortured Restraint came at a time that I had a residency in Venice, Italy. And so I was inspired by looking at some of the sculpture in Italy, and decided to make some drawings that sort of spoke to that, or at least in my mind sort of spoke to that. And so I made these pieces. They are, I think they're like 9 by 12 each, put together as one piece. And then a year or two later, I decided to go back to larger work. These are large drawings, 4 by 6. They are ballpoint pen on Yuko paper. And you can see I've taken the smaller images and just sort of translated them into larger works. This is me actually working on those pieces. I thought it might be interesting to sort of see me actually working on the piece. I'm working on a ping pong table, basically flat. starting with the drawing rolled, working from top to bottom, and just rolling it as I completed the drawing as I moved down to the bottom. But anyway, I thought it would be interesting to sort of see that. These are more drawings, prints on Mylar, just sort of exploring that a little bit more. Again, talking or speaking to issues of race and sexuality in these images, speaking to spirituality, my religion, things that I was taught to believe, and just sort of questioning those things and sort of, in my mind, sort of dealing with them in this imagery in some way, shape, or form, just to sort of release some of my, I'm going to say some of my crazy with doing this or dealing with those issues. And then we get to the works that I did that are in the museum at this point. These pieces are interesting to me because I felt like they were pieces that came very quickly to me. I remember working on them in the summer before having to do a faculty show at Kutztown. And so I was sort of racking my brain about what I wanted to do. And these images sort of came out. And I do think it's interesting that they've ended up where they are. It was quite unexpected, but they are, again, just sort of my sort of dealing with my own sort of issues in terms of how I'm seen and viewed in society at this point. And again, I'm talking really fast and talking through all of this stuff really fast. If I felt like I had more time, I would sort of go more into that, to all of the things that I'm actually thinking when I make these works. But suffice it to say that the work always sort of deals with issues of sexuality and race and my own sort of personal journey in terms of finding my truth and sort of uncovering all of those layers. And I don't know what my time is. I think I'm probably over at this point, but that's my work in a really short introduction.
Great. I don't know if Linnea jumps back in or if we just go into conversation. Thanks for sharing. I feel like I have a lot of questions. They're just more, oh, let me stop remote control. Sorry, let me take back mouse control. But I feel like, yeah, I have very print process specific questions, but I won't go into those. But I was, some of the things that you touched on, I guess, this is something that like the fact that your work deals a lot with race, I think is something I thought about in terms of when I was putting Macho Men together, that I mean, it's almost entirely work by white men. There's one Chinese American artist in the show, but otherwise, I mean, part of it is like what museums have collected. Part of it is like who's had access to art making or been allowed into the academy. But it's also, I think, partly about what like there were Black artists working for the WPA. There were women working for the WPA, but they didn't make images that like were so much like nude. They didn't make nude images of nude or semi-nude men. And I was wondering, like, I think that's something your work deals with, is how Black men are often reduced to their bodies. And I think that's is that a tension in your work, that like it is so much focused on the body, but it's also about moving beyond the body?
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's definitely somewhat in the work. I mean, it definitely is about how I'm viewed in society, whether that is, you know, objectification or something else. The work is trying to sort of speak to that and literally speak to it in a very personal way. I think, my work is a little different in terms of the work that's presented in the show. I think I'm not necessarily making work to, you know, speak to this ideal maleness in any way at this point. I think the work is coming from a very personal space. And I think that, the way that I use my body, the way that I'm speaking to maleness is really a little bit of a critique of maleness and what it means. It's a critique of things that I've been taught and been made to believe about maleness and what it should be. So I see my work as more of a critique of that, as opposed to actually being something that is trying to, show the ideal maleness at this point, I guess is what I want to say.
Yeah, I think I guess I have two questions on that. One is about aggression and masculinity, which is a theme that pops up in Macho Men, that like one full room is kind of images of men fighting. And I don't know if aggression plays a role in your work, or if you think about the conflation of aggression and masculinity. I think one of the newspaper articles says that it's part of the fighting man's trade is like getting drunk and getting into brawls, but like that.
Well, I think that the way that my work is presented, I think there is a little bit of a confrontation to the work, depending on what you're looking at. I mean, those larger pieces, on the canvas, if you're walking into a space and you're looking at them, they have a little bit of confrontation to them, and that's definitely intended. I don't know that I'm trying to intimidate in terms of scaring someone, but there is this desire to be seen and heard, but there's also the desire to not be seen and heard in a way that is hurtful or painful. And so I think the work definitely has a bit of that to it, but it's also what people bring to the work. I don't see myself as someone who is confrontational. That's not how I approach people. I don't try to do that, but there are people who see me as that because of virtually my physicality and what I look like. And so, yeah, I think that there is some of that to the work by virtue of the fact that it's an image of me. But a lot of that comes from the viewer and how they're actually seeing me. So.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. Thinking about scale is like something that gives the work its own agency in a way. Like when bodies are turned into pinups or like postage stamps or something, or prints like they are in Macho Men, that like having a body that is full size automatically gives you this relationship to it that is different from looking at a small picture, a thumbnail of it, but also like that having it over life size also does that. And then I guess I had a question about like how you see your work function. You mentioned that when you're in Venice, you were looking at some Italian art, and I was also when I see your work, I also think of like the Torso Belvedere and like classical sculpture fragments that are just like torsos. I don't know how you see your work functioning within like a long lineage of male nudes or studies of the male body.
I mean, I've certainly looked at a lot of artwork over time, and I think there is some influence from that. I mean, obviously, I was influenced by the work that was in Italy as I was looking at it, and that's not the first time that I've been influenced by that. But I think that again, my whole like. My desire in making my work is to speak to things that are really quite personal, I think, and I don't think that that's unlike a lot of artists, but it's really therapeutic for me to sort of deal with some of those things that again I've been sort of taught or taught to believe, you know, as a youngster, and then growing into an adult and knowing that some of those things aren't true for me. And so I see my work as, you know, having some similarity to history and the history of male figures, but I see my thinking about it as maybe a little bit more contemporary, I think I'm gonna say.
Yeah. Do you feel like you're pushing up against the conventions that are set forth in those
I do. I
histories?
think that I hope that the work does a little bit of that, and uh, uh, you know, I guess time will tell, you know, as we move forward. But I hope that that is a little bit of what's happening with the work. Yes.
So I think we'll switch to questions in the chat. Does that seem good?
I think that seems like a great idea. The questions have been coming in. And I just want to say thank you both, because it was just a pleasure to look at these images with you and start to make some of these connections. So we can just roll the conversation in to some of the questions that are coming in. And for everyone out there, I encourage you, if you have a question, to put it in the Q&A box. I encourage you to have a look at the questions that are already in the Q&A box and give a thumbs up to anything you want to hear answered first. And with that, the first question people are curious about is, James, they'd like to understand a little bit better, how has your understanding of magic and spirituality informed your work?
Um, so growing up as a kid, I was raised in a Baptist church in the South. And so, you know, I was raised to believe what's in the Bible and sort of follow, you know, all of those teachings. And I grew up in Sunday school, went to church. And so, you know, at some point when I realized who I was internally, and that's been some time ago, that there started to be this conflict in me in terms of thinking about religion and thinking about spirituality and trying to reconcile what I knew internally from what I was being taught externally. And so I have a love-hate relationship with religion. I think I'm a very spiritual person. I strive to be that, and spiritual in the sense of trying to be empathetic to everyone that I come in contact with, trying to sort of be understanding of everyone that I come in contact with. That is the type of spirituality I'm most interested in, and that would be a short version of what I would think of as religion. And I'm conflicted because there are some things about Christianity and the way that I was raised that I'm very much, I very much believe and enjoy, and still hold on to some extent, but there are also things that I obviously can't. And so it literally is a love-hate thing for me. In terms, and a lot of that is happening in the work. I mean, if you look at this image on the screen right now, it literally is a cross, but it is a cross that is obscuring for me in some way. And so again, that there is this sort of love-hate relationship with religion in particular, but spirituality is something I'm looking at or feeling is very different for me than religion. I don't see both of them as the same thing. I hope that is.
Yeah, no, it makes sense, and it also just segues really beautifully into the next two sort of related questions. So Adria Sherman asks, could you speak to the significance of the repeated triangles, plus signs, circles, crosses? And similarly, Toby Schwait is curious about, in Null and Void, the use of the muted crosses. So you already addressed this a little bit, but if you could speak a little more.
I think, again, going back to the piece Charmed, which has all of the little symbols on them, I think initially that started with me just wanting to create a mark on my drawing or a disruption to the drawing. And then it became this geometric shape, and then it became this sort of symbol to some degree, and then it became a charm in my head. And so there's 7 of them. They all have varying meanings to me. You know, the cross obviously is dealing somewhat with religion. I'm sorry, and I don't have that piece in front of me, but as you're looking at the transformation of the cross, that it changes into, it starts to disintegrate to some degree. It starts to also sort of explode and blow up a little bit. It goes back into being a cross. It does, and it also, well, it actually starts off as an X. So the way that I view those symbols are they are representations of things that I've sort of paid attention to in my life. It represents country, it represents religion, it represents love, it represents equality. It represents, those symbols have meaning to me in some way. And I just wanted to sort of use them in a way that as I'm transforming, those symbols are also transforming, that they're changing. They are changing me, I'm changing them. And hence, when you get to the bottom pieces, and again, I know these are very hard to see, that emblem sort of changes to gold. It actually has markings on it that looks like stitches, where they're sort of stitched to my chest. But the emblems have, in my mind, passed through me and are back into the environment as something else or something changed. And so hence my thought about this piece is really a lot about transformation and change. And so I hope that is speaking more to what those symbols mean for me. They are both disruptions to my drawing, a physical disruption to my drawing, that traditional thing that I do all the time, but it's also, again, speaking more conceptually to what I want to say with the work as well.
And just to share, we have a comment in the chat where somebody's saying that the symbols here remind them of the heart chakra in this work. And then in relation to null and void, the person saw the cross as taping your mouth shut or preventing breathing. There was that understanding of it. But the next question we have is from Margaret Null, who says, James, it seems like you almost always work in pairs or multiples. Do you sometimes make isolated images as well, or do you feel it's essential to have the contrast and complement of the related images together?
I think it's rare these days that I make a single image where there's no other image to go with it. I think it's very rare for me these days. I think part of my desire to make multiples is that it feels to me like it really sort of drives home the concept a little bit more, is how I'm going to put that. It's also tied into printmaking, like, you know, the repeated image and repeated images of the same thing. There's something very enticing and powerful about that for me. I do like looking at things over time, so multiple pieces, no matter how subtle they are, they have this sense of time for me. So whether it's like, again, a sort of bold change in my body or a subtle tilt of the head, that there is this sort of little shift in time that I find appealing in the work.
Thank you.
Your question, Margaret. Hi.
And June, we have a question for you that was also asked in the chat, actually. And the question is, what led you to juxtapose 17th century Dutch prints with American 20th century prints? And I might ask you to pull up an image that has both of those, if you don't mind.
Yeah, part of it is practical. It's we have good collections of both of those things. But also part of it is, I think initially I was thinking of a more expansive show, but these two moments kept coming up over and over again. And my interest initially, my background's in 17th century Dutch, so my interest initially grew out of the Dutch context, but then I kept finding these American works that had really strong resonances. So here's another one where the figures are almost posed in the same way. And again, like these, and then I started picking up on kind of political resonances as well, in terms of like the Dutch, they were both moments of crises. So the Dutch have just declared independence from Spain, and in America it's the Great Depression, and then in both contexts they're using these images of muscly bodies to be kind of political symbols of, or symbols of political strength and also communal strength. So like the print on the left is an allegory of like all of the Dutch provinces coming together and fighting the monarch of Spain, or the kind of a very top-down organized monarchy, versus the Dutch, which were a republic of provinces that organized together. And then on the right is an illustration from Karl Marx's Das Kapital that's about the common worker and how the strength of a country comes from the common worker, the kind of value, the wealth of a nation comes from the workers, not from the people at the top. So there were interesting kind of political resonances that I think came through while I was putting it together. And then I saw another question that was about why we chose James's work that is of the faces rather than of the torsos, and that's partly also practical in that those works came into the collection before I started working on the show. They came in, I think, 2020, and then the show started getting put together in 2021. So it was that I had seen James's other work and then had seen how he talked about his work. And Louis Marquezano, who's the head of Prints and Drawings, was the one who acquired the work, and thought it would be nice to, or I thought it would be good to put it on view next to the show, because there are similar themes, but also they, as James mentioned, do very different things.
Yeah, thank you. And I'll just pass along the flattering comments that are coming from the chat. Such an ingenious exhibition. What a novel comparison. And a sort of question that digs a little deeper. Russell Walter wonders if there's much information surrounding the reaction of the general public to the 17th century Dutch images. Like, what did people at the time think of these images?
I've had a hard time finding much information. I mean, there's things like the print on the left got a nickname in the 17th century called the Potato Man, the Canola Man. So I think we can tell that they also saw these images slightly comical, which I think that's something I've thought about in terms of, I mean, I find some of the American works also have some amount of like, they're like so over the top that they come around to being sort of comical, but it's also, I think, I mean, this is getting away from answering that question because I don't have a good answer for it, but it relates to how you see like images of Putin shirtless on horseback, or like Trump's head photoshopped onto like Sylvester Stallone's body, and like this, again, conflation of aggression with masculinity, but also like I don't know, the ideal taken to the point of being kind of comical or grotesque even. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, thank you. So to switch back to a very practical question for you, James. Jeffrey Kugler asks, in working with ballpoint, where the ink can dry slowly, did you find a technique or method to, sort of prevent the smearing, or was that a happy accident at times?
I think that the way that I work, there is a little, if you see those drawings in person, there is a little bit of a smearing of the ink, but not a lot. I think the way that I work, I was pretty careful in terms of my mark making to make sure that there wasn't too much smearing going on. For people who know me and know my work, I'm pretty meticulous in the things that I try to do. So I'm very careful, particularly with the drawings on Yupo paper, the really large drawings and ballpoint pen, particularly drawing all those little fine lines. You know, one mistake and, you know, the drawing is kind of lost. So I had to be very careful about the pen. In those images, you actually don't see this, I don't think, but I also had like a small paper towel on my table as I was working. So if you know ballpoint pen, it gets a little bit gummy and stuff gets on the end, and then you can get this glob of ink. So every few marks, I would actually go to the paper towel and just sort of clean the pen and keep going. And so that helped prevent a lot of issues, a lot of mistakes at that point.
Thank you. And I mean, so I'll just say we don't have so much time left, so maybe I'll just ask a final question. And this question is from Frederick Nunley, who asks, when did you come out? And to which I would perhaps add on a layer of, you talked about this in relation to your work and sort of how you see that plays out in your work.
This might be a little bit of an unpopular answer, but I'm going to say that I feel like I'm mostly out, but there's still a little bit of me that's still closeted, I think. And some of that has nothing to do with me. Well, it does have to do with me. I mean, I think I can walk out, you know, outside and someone sees the physical me, they won't necessarily know that I'm a gay person unless I'm wearing that on my sleeve or unless I say that. So that in some way is a way that I'm not completely out, if that makes sense. I do also think that there are other smaller things about me that aren't, that I'm not necessarily, have not necessarily dealt with at this point. So the quick answer to that question is I don't feel completely out. Maybe I'm about 98-ish% out, but there's a little bit that's still closeted for various reasons. And then I would say my 98% coming out has happened over time. Like it's hard to pinpoint a specific time. You know, there was a time when I was working at Kutztown and I was sharing an office with my first office mate, Anna Quo, that I, you know, came out to her. I wasn't necessarily out to the rest of the faculty, the people that I was working with, but I came out to her in that moment. But over time became more comfortable with people knowing who I was, you know, as I move forward. I can give you a more specific time of when I really made the decision that it was time to deal with this. And I think that started in graduate school when I moved here to Philadelphia and I had moved away from Virginia, my home, people who knew me. And so there was a sense of comfort in being in a new space, in a new place, and feeling a little bit more capable of being or pursuing a point of coming out. And that, you know, I think I was probably 27, 28 at that time. So, maybe a little late by some folks' standard at this point, because you know, if I think about my husband at this point, came out much earlier than I did. We've had some conversations about that, but yeah, it's hard to literally pinpoint a specific time. I could also pinpoint a time that sticks out probably the most in my head, and that was my parents, both my parents finding out, and it wasn't necessarily me actually coming out to them. I was outed by a former partner, which was a pretty sort of rough situation to sort of deal with at the time. But in a lot of ways, it was a good thing, because it would have taken me much longer to actually say the words to them. And in some ways, he did me a favor by actually saying them for me. And so, and that was that was probably in late '96. That relationship was actually ending. So that is a time that I think the nucleus of my family knew at that point, where it was undeniable. So
Thank you. And I'll just acknowledge, somehow it's already 7 o'clock, and it's been such a wonderful hour. I know for me, looking at these images with you and talking about these themes was really generative. I think based on the chat, everyone shares that feeling.
can I say one quick thing?
Please. No, if you have any final things to say, now is your moment. So please.
I just wanted to say, I have looked at everything in this chat for the most part, and I appreciate all of the wonderful comments. I just wanted to acknowledge that, even though I have not been responsive, because I'm too nervous about everything that's going on in the moment, but I do see them, and thank you all. And thank you all for this opportunity, for sure.
And Jun, of course, thank you to you for putting all of these wonderful works on view, giving us the chance to have this conversation and share this work. Thank you to everyone who is joining us this evening. A final just reminder, Macho Men and Null and Void, James's drawings, are both on view through March 20th. I hope you'll come see them for yourselves, or maybe re-see them, visit them again. By joining us tonight, you are supporting the museum, and we're so appreciative that you're spending this time with us. I want to give extra thanks to anyone who might have donated to tonight's program. That helps us keep offering free programs like this. Our next virtual talk will be the Arcadia Library Lecture, How Race Changed Sight in America, with Dr. Sarah Lewis on February 28th at 6 p.m. We'll put a link in the chat to that in case you're interested. Truly wonderful to see all the thank yous coming into the chat, and what a beautiful community of people we have with us tonight. So with that, thank you all.
Also reiterate thanks to James for joining us, and
Yeah,
this was great. Sharing your work, it was awesome.
Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you all, and have a wonderful night.